Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a book that's had a huge impact on how people think about self-improvement. Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yeah, it's a game changer.
Definitely. And I'm really excited to unpack it all. So what's the core idea?
It's all about the power of tiny changes,
Hmm,
making small improvements consistently over time, and those add up to remarkable results, kind of like compound interest.
I love that analogy. Compound interest, but for self-improvement. I think that really nails it.
It's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. Now, Clear starts the book with a really interesting story. It's about the British cycling team.
Oh, yeah, fascinating story.
They were kind of mediocre for years, and then suddenly they become this dominant force in cycling.
Winning everything. Olympics, Tour de France.
Right. So what changed?
Well, they brought in this new coach, Dave Brailsford, and he had this philosophy. He called it the aggregation of marginal gains. It's actually a pretty simple idea. He believed that if you break everything down into the smallest details and then improve each of those tiny details by just 1%, well, all those small improvements add up to massive results.
So what kinds of things were they doing?
Everything. I mean, they redesigned the bike seats, they tested different fabrics for the rider's gear to reduce wind resistance, they even optimized the hand-washing techniques of the team to avoid illness.
Wow. It sounds a bit obsessive, to be honest.
Maybe a little.
But clearly it worked. I mean, the results speak for themselves.
Oh, for sure. It's a great example of the power of compounding.
Right. So tiny changes add up. But how does that apply to, well, the rest of us? Those of us who aren't Olympic athletes. What can we take away from this for our everyday lives?
It's about consistency. It's about showing up every day and making those small improvements. Even if they seem insignificant at the time, they're not. It's those little things that over time create a ripple effect and lead to big changes.
So we need to be patient. It's not a quick fix.
Exactly. It's a long game. And it's not just about cycling. This principle applies to anything you want to improve. Productivity, learning a new language, relationships, finances, you name it.
Okay, so we need to make small, consistent changes. But Clear also makes a distinction between goals and systems. And I found that really interesting.
Yeah, that's a key point.
He says, and I love this quote, "The purpose of setting goals is to win the game. The purpose of building systems is to continue playing the game." Can you break that down a bit?
Yeah.
What's the difference between goals and systems?
Sure. So goals are about the outcome you want to achieve.
Like, I want to write a book.
Yeah, exactly. But systems are about the processes that get you to that goal.
Okay.
So your system might be writing for an hour every morning before work, or it might be setting aside a specific time each week to brainstorm ideas. The system is what helps you actually do the work day in and day out.
So it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey.
Yeah, and the vehicle that gets you there.
So goals are important for giving us direction, but systems are what actually get us there.
Exactly. And a good system will keep working for you long after you've achieved a specific goal.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this all fits together. I think a lot of us get caught up in setting goals, but we don't always put the systems in place to actually achieve them.
It's common trap.
And speaking of shifting perspectives, Clear also dives into this concept of identity-based habits.
Oh yeah, this is powerful stuff.
He suggests that real change happens when we focus on who we want to become rather than what we want to achieve. What does that actually mean?
It's about shifting your beliefs about yourself, your identity. Every time you do something, you're casting a vote for the type of person you are. So if you want to become a writer, every time you sit down and write, you're reinforcing that identity.
Makes sense.
It's not about willpower.
Or forcing yourself to do something you hate.
Right. It's about aligning your actions with the person you aspire to be.
Clear shares this great story in the book about Brian Clark. He had this lifelong nail-biting habit. Couldn't stop. But then he got a manicure one day, and afterward he realized, hey, I actually like having nice nails. And that small change, that shift in his self-image was all it took. He stopped biting his nails.
I love that story. It highlights how even a small change in how you see yourself can have a huge impact on your behavior.
So it's not about trying to be someone you're not. It's about becoming the person you want to be.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about tiny changes adding up. We've talked about systems versus goals. And we've talked about identity-based habits.
A lot of good stuff already.
Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. The 4 laws of behavior change.
Ah, yes, the framework.
This is where Clear gives us a practical roadmap for building better habits.
And breaking bad ones.
Right. So the 4 laws are: make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying.
A great recipe for change.
Let's start with the first one, make it obvious. What's that all about?
Well, it's about understanding how cues trigger our habits. Clear talks about this study where they simply moved an electricity meter to a more visible location in people's homes. And guess what? People started using less electricity.
Just by seeing the meter more often.
Exactly. The visible meter served as a reminder.
A cue to be mindful of their energy consumption.
Right. And that's the power of making things obvious.
So how can we use this idea of obvious cues to build better habits?
Think about the habits you want to build, and then think about how you can make them more obvious in your environment. Let's say you want to start a daily meditation practice.
Okay, I like that. Meditation.
Well, you can make it obvious by setting up a dedicated meditation space in your home. Maybe you put out a nice cushion, or you light a candle every morning. Those visual cues serve as a reminder and make it much easier to actually sit down and meditate.
That makes sense. So it's about creating those visual reminders.
Right. And it's not just about visual cues. Clear also talks about this technique called pointing and calling.
Pointing and calling. What's that?
It's this method used by Japanese railway workers. They actually point at and call out each step of a process to reduce errors.
Interesting.
And it works because it forces you to be more present and aware of what you're doing.
So we can apply that to our own lives by becoming more aware of our current habits.
Right. Think about your morning routine. Do you automatically reach for your phone first thing? Do you brush your teeth before or after you make coffee? Just noticing these things, bringing them into your conscious awareness, can help you start making more deliberate choices.
So it's about paying attention, becoming more mindful of those autopilot actions we do every day. I like that. Okay, let's move on to the second law. Make it attractive.
This is where things get really interesting. We start to dive into the neurochemistry of habit formation.
Dopamine, right.
You got it. Dopamine. That neurotransmitter in our brain that's associated with pleasure and reward.
And our brains are wired to seek out activities that release dopamine, which is why we crave things like social media, junk food, video games. They all trigger that dopamine rush.
And make us want to do them again and again.
Right, even if we know they're not good for us in the long run.
It's a powerful force.
Claire even talks about how the modern food industry, designs food to be hyperpalatable, to hijack our brain's reward system.
It's true. And it's not an accident. They figured out how to create products that are literally irresistible.
So we're up against some pretty strong forces here. But can we use this knowledge to our advantage? I mean, can we use dopamine to make our good habits more attractive?
We can. And one way to do that is through something called temptation bundling.
Temptation bundling. Tell me more.
It's about pairing an activity you want to do with an activity you need to do. So maybe you only allow yourself to watch your favorite show while you're on the treadmill. Or you listen to a podcast you love while you're doing chores.
Clever. So you're making the necessary activity more appealing by linking it to something you already enjoy.
Exactly. You're essentially hijacking your brain's reward system to your advantage. Make those healthy habits more appealing.
I love that. Okay, we've covered make it obvious and make it attractive. Let's move on to the third law. Make it easy.
This one's all about reducing friction, making those good habits as effortless as possible.
And I think this is where a lot of us struggle.
It's easy to get bogged down in planning and preparation, but that can actually become a form of procrastination.
Oh yeah, I've been there. Analysis paralysis, right?
Exactly. Clear tells a great story about this photography professor who divided his class into two groups. One group was graded on the quantity of photos they took. The other group was graded on the quality of a single photo.
Interesting.
And guess what? The best photos came from the quantity group.
Wow, really?
Yeah, they were forced to take action, to experiment. They learned from their mistakes. The other group, they got so caught up in trying to create this one perfect photo that they ended up overthinking it.
It's a good reminder that sometimes we just need to get out of our heads and start doing.
Exactly. Action trumps perfection every time.
So how do we apply this to our own lives? How do we make our good habits easier to actually do?
Think about how you can optimize your environment. If you want to eat healthier, stock your fridge with healthy snacks and prepare meals ahead of time. If you want to exercise more, lay out your workout clothes the night before, or find a gym that's on your way home from work.
So it's about setting yourself up for success, removing those obstacles in advance.
Right. It's about making those good choices the easy choices. Clear also talks about something called the 2-minute rule, which I find incredibly helpful.
The 2-minute rule, what's that?
It's about scaling down your new habit to something that takes less than 2 minutes to do. So instead of trying to go for a 30-minute run, You might just commit to putting on your running shoes.
That's it.
Yeah. Or instead of writing a whole chapter of your book, you just commit to writing one sentence. The idea is to make the starting point so ridiculously easy that you can't say no, even when you're feeling unmotivated.
So it's about tricking yourself into getting started.
In a way, yes, you're building momentum.
I like that. And on the flip side, we can make our bad habits harder to do.
Right. Like unsubscribing from those tempting email lists or deleting social media apps from your phone.
Put those cookies out of reach.
Exactly. Make it less convenient to engage in those undesirable behaviors.
So we've made things obvious, attractive, and easy. What's the fourth and final law?
Make it satisfying. And this one's all about harnessing the power of reward.
This is where things get really interesting, I think.
Absolutely. It's all about those rewards. It's about understanding that our brains are wired to prioritize immediate rewards, even if they're small.
So we're more likely to repeat a behavior if it feels good right away. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do we make those good habits feel satisfying, especially when, they often require effort and delayed gratification?
Clear highlights a fascinating study in the book. It's about hand-washing habits in Pakistan. They found that simply providing soap and education about the importance of hand-washing wasn't enough to change behavior.
Really? Why not?
Well, it just wasn't that satisfying. But then they introduced this new soap. It was sparkly, and it smelled really good.
Oh, interesting. So they made it more pleasurable.
Exactly. And what happened? Hand-washing rates skyrocketed, and the habit stuck, even years later.
Wow. So even small changes that increase the immediate satisfaction of a behavior can have a big impact.
Absolutely. It proves that we can make even mundane habits more appealing if we just find a way to make them feel good.
This makes me think about habit tracking. I find it so satisfying to check things off a list or see those streaks grow longer each day.
It's a great way to make progress visible, and that sense of accomplishment can be incredibly motivating.
It taps into that desire for immediate gratification, like, hey, I did the thing, I'm awesome.
Exactly. It's like Jerry Seinfeld's "don't break the chain" method. He used to mark an X on his calendar every day he wrote jokes. That simple visual representation of his consistency kept him going.
I've heard about that. So simple but effective.
It really is. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Just a simple calendar or a habit tracking app. Anything that helps you visualize your progress and those small wins along the way.
Okay, so we can make good habits satisfying. But what about bad habits? Can we flip this around and make them less satisfying?
We can. One way is through what Clear calls a habit contract.
A habit contract sounds serious.
It can be. It's basically a commitment strategy with consequences.
Yeah.
You might agree to donate money to a cause you dislike every time you slip up, or you could have a friend hold you accountable.
So it's like a little insurance policy for your good habits.
That's a great way to put it. It adds a bit of immediate pain to those bad habits, and that can be enough to deter you.
Makes sense. Okay, we've covered the 4 laws of behavior change. But Clear also goes deeper in the book, exploring how our genetics and personality can influence our habits.
Yeah, this is an important point. We all have unique predispositions and strengths. What works for one person might not work for another.
Right. We're not all blank slates.
And it's about understanding your own natural tendencies. What are you good at? What do you enjoy?
Clear uses this great analogy of Michael Phelps. He's obviously built for swimming. Could he have been a world-class runner? Maybe, but it'd been a lot harder. He was born to swim. So how do we figure out what we're naturally inclined towards? How do we find our swimming lane, so to speak?
Clear talks about this concept called the explore-exploit trade-off. At first, you need to explore lots of different options, try new things, experiment. But once you find something that resonates with you, that aligns with your strengths and interests, exploit it. Go all in on that thing.
So it's about trying different things, seeing what sticks, and then focusing your energy on those areas where you have the most potential.
Exactly. Clear gives a great example of Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert.
Oh yeah, I love Dilbert.
Me too. And his success wasn't based on being the best artist or writer. It was about combining those skills, humor, and business knowledge in a unique way.
That's inspiring. It reminds us that we don't have to be the best at everything. We just have to find our own unique way to shine. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. Tiny changes, systems, identity, the 4 laws. It's a lot to digest.
Yep.
But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear what resonated most with you.
You know, for me, it's the power of small changes. It's so easy to get caught up in thinking we need these massive overhauls to make a difference. But Atomic Habits really shifts that perspective. You can achieve some pretty incredible things by focusing on those tiny 1% improvements each day.
I agree. It takes the pressure off,
Yeah.
right? You don't have to have the perfect plan or wait for this perfect moment. Just start small, take action, and the momentum builds from there.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about what you do, it's about who you are. That's the identity piece we talked about. If you can cultivate an identity that supports your desired habits, well, that makes all the difference.
So like if you want to be a writer, you start by thinking of yourself as a writer, and then you make writing a regular part of your routine, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Exactly. Consistency over intensity, always. And don't forget about those 4 laws. Make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. Those tools can be applied to any habit you're trying to build or break.
Absolutely. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about and apply to my own life.
What advice would you give to someone who's maybe feeling a little overwhelmed? They want to make changes, but they're not even sure where to start.
I'd say start with just one habit. Pick something small, something achievable. Maybe it's drinking a glass of water first thing in the morning, or going for a 10-minute walk every day. And once you've mastered that one habit, then you move on to the next one. So it's like building a habit muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly. And be patient. It takes time for new habits to stick. Don't get discouraged if you slip up now and then. It happens to all of us. Just get back on track and keep moving forward.
Clear has a great line about that. He says, missing once is an accident. Missing twice is the start of a new habit.
So true. It's all about being aware of those slip-ups and course correcting as needed.
It's progress, not perfection. Right?
Exactly. And one of the best ways to track that progress and stay motivated is through habit tracking. I know we talked about it earlier, but it's so important. There's something really powerful about seeing those streaks grow longer each day. It just reinforces that sense of accomplishment.
I agree. It's a great visual reminder of how far you've come. And as you build those habits, it's also important to take some time for reflection. Just check in with yourself and see how things are going.
Absolutely. Ask yourself, are my habits still aligned with my goals and values? Are they moving me closer to the person I want to be?
It's about being intentional, right?
Yeah.
Making sure those habits are actually serving you.
Exactly. You're the architect of your life. You get to design those habits, those small actions that ultimately shape who you become.
I love that. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in our deep dive into Atomic Habits. It's such a rich book, full of insights and practical strategies. What's one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
I hope they feel empowered. Empowered to take control of their habits and start making those small changes that can lead to really extraordinary results. Remember, success is a product of daily habits, not once-in-a-lifetime transformations.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up our deep dive into Atomic Habits by James Clear. We highly encourage you to pick up a copy and explore it further on your own. There's so much wisdom to uncover. But before you go, we'd love to hear from you. What resonated with you most from this episode? What's one atomic habit you're going to focus on building or breaking? Let us know. And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into a world of fascinating ideas.